Good morning, Graham Vincent, violin maker, musician. It's time for a Q&A again. I'm trying to do these Q&A videos roughly once a week, and if I'm going to maintain that schedule, then today's the day. So here we go. I've got a couple of monitors up here, and I've got various questions from the last one up, and also I did a video on varnish making as well, so that kicked up a few questions. So we'll have a look at those, and I'll also have a quick look through the violin making discussion group on Facebook, and see if there's anything to comment on then as well. So yeah, here we go. So there's a curious resonance, actually. It's because I've got this violin sitting down in front of me. I don't know if you can hear a sort of, and maybe I'll move it if it gets a bit much. Okay, so questions kicked up by the violin making Q&A number 15. Okay, yeah. So I was talking about having made a violin with a very low arching and the sort of the sound that produced. And Gervais Gallant has got back with a question. Interesting what you have to say about arching height. Does that mean the height of both belly and back? What are these specific heights? I've been working in the 15 to 17 millimeter range for height at the bridge. Was that lovely low arched fiddle you're talking about outside that range? If yes, maybe you could tell us anything about anything else that was unusual with it. Did you use spruce and sycamore maple? Okay, right. 15 to 17 is a perfectly sort of normal range. However, I tend to make mine from 12 millimeter stock, so to speak. So I start at 12 millimeters. And then take it down from there. So that's front and back. So basically the high point at the bridge and in the center of the back is about 12 millimeters from the underside. And that is, that's down at the sort of gentle kind of sloping level. Occasionally I'll make it sort of 13 or 14 if I feel in the mood to do so. But as a rule of thumb, 12 is my sort of starting point. And I like the kind of sound that gives. It seems to give a fairly powerful instrument, but it still leaves you enough meat to, put some nice shape into it. That specific instrument that I was talking about with a really low arch, and you're gonna be slightly horrified by this, I suspect, but that was 8 millimeters from the underside to the, so there's up the 8 millimeters overall thickness for the front. I think the back was slightly more, but I took it down to something similar because as I just said, I tend to do the front and the back out of the same, with the same swell, so to speak, even though the shape is subtly different. And yeah, 8 mil made it look really flat. It was, I still managed to get some shape into it, but you have to recognize that's a fairly low arching, very low arching really. And coupled with the standard rib height of 30 millimeters, as we're saying, it meant for a fairly small volume, internal volume, that is, violin, despite the fact it turned out to be surprisingly nice sounding and quite loud as well. So it was an interesting one, that one, very much so. And in terms of what it was made from, the front was a spruce, as far as I remember, and I certainly remember that the back and sides were figured ash, so ash. The neck was a piece of English sycamore with a nice bit of figure in it as well. Yeah, so interesting. Okay, next question. I think that's more of a statement, really. I liked your speaker analogy. This is from Monty Latham. I liked your speaker analogy. The back of the belly under the bridge being the driver and the rest of it being the cone, projecting the sound to the back to amplify the amount of sound holes. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I kind of like to think of it as this bit is the driven bit, because as I said last time, when you put the bow, when you stroking with the bow, you know, it's a continuous feed of power, unlike a plucked instrument. Well, I mean, you have to listen to, and one thing I didn't do last time is, of course, you know, pizzicato. With the heavier strings, that will ring on for a little while, but the sort of sustain that you get on pizzicato, you know, wouldn't be acceptable, or the lack of sustain, shall we say, wouldn't be acceptable on, you know, a plucked instrument like a guitar or something. Yeah, so that it's a different approach because of the, you know, the different drive, if you like, plucked versus, you know, or bowed versus plucked. Right, the real non sequitur. I mean, yeah, quite an involved question last time about sort of methods of controlling resonance within violins and introducing additional methods to promote certain frequencies and so on. And I mean, I don't want to go over the whole thing again, but I mean, basically, there's a good interesting point here. The issues I see with the historical methods of increasing vibration are twofold. They all use large vibrating mass aimed at amplify vibrations using waves already in the air. This seems to have served to rob the body of energy while also preventing moving air from producing sound. Yeah, I'll have to have a good think about that. I mean, personally, I tend to think of it in, I mean, I'm not commenting on what you're saying about other people's approach, but my approach is and always, I think, will be, you know, keep the thing as light as possible so that it doesn't hinder things too much. Promote a nice sound and, you know, a balance of richness and cutting ability by the sort of shaping of the arching. Then obviously you have some influence by, you know, what you do with the bridge. Of course, you can control some of that, and also you know, sound post positioning, but that ability for the thing to move and the fact that it doesn't weigh much, so the energy you put in comes out. That's, and also, of course, I mean, going to wood choice is the fact that I always work really hard to choose nothing but, you know, really resonant wood. I think that's important. The direction of vibration is not conductive to cooperation. I think conducive. It is in fact conducive. I just read it incorrectly. The direction of vibration is not conducive to cooperation. Very true. Of course, you know, the strings are vibrating sideways on, and yet you would think you're trying to get energy down into the front, you know, vibrations that way. I think that's why the sound post is so important in a violin, because you've got, effectively, you're introducing a pivot point there. So the bridge tends to, that's the bridge tends to rock that way. So some of that side to side is translated into an up and down. So I think that's part of what it does. Okay, now another thought here. I'm thinking that in having flat, essentially axe-shaped pieces aligned parallel to the corner blocks will allow them to act as vibrating ballasts, correcting for areas where vibrations interfere destructively. Interesting. You see, I would have to have a really good think about that and try and come up with some kind of demonstration that is going to help. I suppose probably the easiest thing to do is just to do it and actually sort of build a violin with those in. So maybe that's something we should have a play with. But for me, I mean, as I've said many times, I actually try and build in a certain amount of unevenness. I don't aim to get the front or the back of even thickness beautifully across the whole thing. I like there to be variation, because I think that If everything is too even, the front or the back might be too good at producing a particular frequency. So I think by having unevenness, it gives the instrument a chance of producing most frequencies to some extent, and removes the ability for the instrument to produce any one frequency really well, if that makes sense. And that's kind of, I feel that's backed up a little bit by when you look at some of the old instruments which have so many cleats and repairs that they're not consistent. The front is not a consistent homogeneous piece. I think that might be partly what's going on. And some of those instruments with all those repairs still sound amazing. I mean, there are almost no Stradivarius violins or Granaries that don't have quite a lot of repair work, because they've had hundreds of years of hard work. So there we go. So yeah, some musings. I don't think I've really answered the question though. A question from MJF 1036. A question about wood. I reside in the deep US South. The majority of our native trees are yellow pine and palms. Walnut and versions of soft maple are the usual hardwood trees. Cedar and cypress are also in abundance. Are these suitable woods for a first violin? Thank you. Okay, well, for me, the question has, I think on this channel, and other people have as well, we've demonstrated that you can make a lovely sounding violin out of a whole wide range of timbers. It doesn't have to be the traditional sort of limited range of woods that have been used generally. But I think they need to be fairly low density. They need to be fairly stiff. They need to look good. They need to have structural integrity, obviously. And for me, one of the most important things of all is, if you hold a piece of this wood up and tap it, it should ring. And if it doesn't ring, if it just goes thud rather than boing, it means it's not going to send out the energy that you're putting into it. It's just going to absorb it. And if you build something out of wood that just absorbs all the energy you put into it, then it's probably not going to play well. And I've said this so many times, but I think it's fundamental. So, armed with that information, I think you just need to have a look at the woods that you have available and say, do they meet, to my satisfaction, do they meet those criteria? And if they do, why not? Do it, absolutely. Killer Sugar 6816. What can be used as a ground coat? And why is it something different than the varnish? Okay. I think I think this is a kind of a spillover question from the violin varnish video that I did. Well, you're trying to get most of the colour is in the varnish, and what you're trying to do with sealing the violin and the ground coat is you're trying to kind of control how the colour penetrates the violin, in terms of not killing the chatoyance in the timbre, and also you're trying to a certain extent to do any grain filling that you need to, although with most of the timbers that are generally used in violin making, that's not a major issue, and you shouldn't have any massive holes and gaps in your purfling and so on that you need to flood with varnish. It can be the same material as the varnish if you're using a varnish which isn't too coloured. You could literally do the sealing of the violin with the varnish thinned down, and then if I'm assuming that you're going to be adding some colour to your varnish perhaps later on, then you would use for the ground you would use a varnish with very little colour in it and cut it back so that you've got a nice, fairly neutral coloured violin. Not, I mean, you can use colours in the ground, but they're not generally the same as the varnish. So this is a very difficult question to answer, because this whole thing, I don't know what particular colour you're using in your varnish and so on, so I'm having to sort of couch this in terms which cover all possibilities. But I mean, you could literally seal with thin down varnish, use it as the ground, cut it back, prepare the surface, get rid of any sort of blemishes and so on, and then start using the same stuff, maybe with additional colour as, you know, the varnish build. I hope that helps. Oh, yeah, same chap, Killer Sugar 6816. I'm preparing to make my first violin. I acquired a fingerboard scoop template. I had not previously known this curve existed. What's it for? And why not have the distance from the strings be uniform down the length of the fingerboard? Okay, scoop template. I assume you're talking about the fact that the fingerboard along its length is not straight. And the reason for that is, if you imagine a piece of string, or you know, a violin string between 2 points, when it's bowed or plucked, it vibrates like this, yeah? So on a guitar, you've got frets, so you've got a nice clean point at which you press the sort of the string down, and you haven't, I mean, there's an initial burst, but then that sort of, that envelope, that shape kind of reduces reasonably quickly. On a violin, because you're bowing continually, that envelope stays at that all the time you're playing a loud note, because you are literally holding the string down against a flat surface. If that string, and it happens more on the bass strings, on the lower notes, if that envelope shape is bigger, so to speak, than the actual line between the point of contact and the nut, then that envelope will bang against the fingerboard, and it will mean that the note won't sound truly and properly. So what you do is you scoop the fingerboard so that at any one point the fingerboard is actually running away, if you like, which gives you a little bit more space for that sounding, you know, the movement of the string. Hope that makes sense. And of course, because the bass strings move more than the treble strings, that scoop needs to be greater on the bass side. So in practice, I mean, I don't use a template for it. I generally will make the fingerboard flat and then take it down so that I have, and I normally work to something about the thickness of the string at that point. So you imagine the E string is pretty thin, so the scoop on the treble side is fairly slight, fairly gentle. On the bass side, on the G string side, you know, the string is much thicker, so, you know, the scoop again is thicker. I hope that makes sense. Andrew Parrish, 437, having just made the rookie mistake of fitting the bass bar on the wrong side and having to remove it and remake it. You know, like I wrote, there are always new ways of making mistakes, but that I must admit, although I've done a lot of them, I haven't yet done that one. Could still happen. My question is there such a thing as a left-handed violin? And is this just a case of putting the bass bar on the other side and putting the strings on the other way up? There are left-handed violins, and yeah, it is just everything is mirrored. So because the tuning peg for the E string is further up, so that, you know, it gives you a bit more space for your hand, you know, then obviously, you know, those need to be changed as well. So those are, you know, peg layout mirrored, what's going on inside mirrored. Yeah, so, and also the scoop, which we've just discussed, obviously mirrored as well. So yeah, that's how you make a left-handed violin. But, if you're left-handed, I would strongly suggest that you play the violin right-handed. If you're learning the violin, because there's so much going on with the left hand and the right hand on a violin. I don't think it's actually a massive advantage either way. Playing the violin for a number of years, as I have, has given me much more dexterity with my left hand than most right-handed people have, and I'm sure most violinists, many musicians will know that from experience. It's also given me a much bigger reach, which is quite funny. If I sort of stretch them out, I mean, I can easily stretch quite considerably further on my left hand than on my right, because you don't tend to be stretching much. So anyway, I digress slightly, but the advantage of playing left-handed is marginal, but the disadvantage is huge, because suddenly you have almost no choice of instruments to buy, and you just won't be able to play in orchestras because you look completely out of place, and people won't want you sitting there with all the bows going up and down and one of them doing that, So it's kind of shooting yourself in the foot for no advantage, would be the way I put it. However, do your own thing. There's nothing wrong with being an individual, but you will be an individual. Carol 3204. Okay, is making basically a sort of a comment about the whole discussion we had last time about internal volumes, me thinking of the front as a speaker, and the resonant string questions and so on. And they've just attached a couple of videos actually, which you can find on the last Q&A. One is a link to a Stroh violin, which is, if you don't know about Stroh violins, it's worth a good look. They're quite amusing. And the other is Nickel Harper. It was interesting. Question from Robin Smith 2610. Need help on my G and D. My finger placement is closer to nut than the A and E by about 1/8 of an inch, which is quite a lot. That telling me the gap to fingerboard is too large on G, D. The distance, how deeply set I don't know if this is going to focus in, but it doesn't really matter. Just how deeply set the strings are into the nut. The distance between the underside of the string and the fingerboard is fundamental in placement of your finger, and certainly when you. I'm as a folk musician, I tend to sort of stick in some fairly basic keys, and I don't get to play B flat very often, for example. But when I do, you suddenly you understand, how critical that is. So I think it is telling you exactly as you suggest, that the nut isn't actually sufficiently cut in, probably. But this is me answering the question without seeing the thing in person, so it could easily be wrong. Okay, that's all the questions from the Q&A. Let's have a quick sprint through some of the other things that were kicked up from the violin varnish. What's it all about? Which was my video number 145. Jeff 034 put up a really useful kind of his approach to sealing using ground and varnishing. It's really good, actually, a nice system. Thank you, Jeff. That's actually really interesting. Well, there were a few comments, but were there any questions from there? Well, there was one, actually. Here we go. Jean Dubois, one. Hi, Graham. I really enjoyed your speak, and I'm asking myself up to which point that wood may be damped when staining with tea. May the join of the plates be damaged? Have you already tried to seal first and then stain? Could it prevent the wood from being too much damped? Forgive my English, I'm from South France. Okay, yeah. Right, no, you do actually do the staining before you do any sealing, and yeah, you don't want to absolutely flood it. What I tend to do is I tend to put it on and then wipe it off, and you know, you want to be in an environment where it dries reasonably quickly, which, being in the south of France, I'm sure you'll be fine. Me being in the south of England during the winter, things take a little while to dry sometimes. So no, it's just, you know, it is water-based, obviously, and, you know, hide glue is damaged by exposure to moisture. So yeah, it's a balance. You have to be careful. Yeah, that's really all I have to say about that one. Jack Bombeek 4958. Hi Graham, if I understand correctly, a wood sealer prevents colour from penetrating deeply, but does not seal the pores. Is that contradictory? If the pores are open, then colour will be sucked into them. Also, how do you prevent orange peel if the pores are not closed? Okay, I mean, most timbers that are used for violin making don't have a massive wide open grain structure. So, yeah, I mean, when you do seal it, it may not fill all the pores, but it does seal them. You know, it may sink into, if this is an open pore here and that's the surface, you know, the seal may be like this, but nevertheless it will stop. It will still be a continuous layer which stops colour penetrating. And then the ground will go quite some way to filling those pores. And as we've touched on before, if there's colour in the ground, it's generally a slightly different colour from the varnish anyway. Also, how do you prevent orange peel if the pores are not closed? If you're using a timber with a wider grain structure like ash, you either do fill that, fill the grain, or you enjoy the grain pattern, so to speak. You actually just look at it as being part of the nature of that wood, of that timber. A question from Gonzalo Chalo Lucia. Have you tried applying diluted hide glue or albumen and powdered pigments and cleaning excess with Raptop? No, I've done the hide glue and albumen, but not with powdered pigments. I was thinking of using this for ground for the top of a viola, and I'm making... Yeah, it sounds like... I mean, the hide glue and albumen kind of approach, that's kind of a sealer rather than the ground, so you probably wouldn't be wanting to put any colour into that. Only the spruces. I don't like it on flamed woods. It dulls it, yeah. I mean, what you've said, I seem to be getting a good result matching it all later when applying colours with spirit varnishes on test strips. Well, I think you've said it all there, haven't you? Test strips. I mean, like I say, personally, I wouldn't go down the route of actually putting powdered pigments into the actual sealing of it. But testing what you do beforehand has got to be the answer, hasn't it? Be interested. I mean, all this and all of the other questions I've answered. Please, let me know how these things go. So do follow up with a let us know how it went. Okay, let's have a very quick look, because we're up to about half an hour and I don't want you all getting bored. Let's have a really quick look on the discussion group then. I'm not sure if there are any real questions this time. I mean, there's some interesting discussions going on. Someone had gone to the trouble of producing a massive stock of walnut ribs and let them dry. They split them too early when they were still a bit green, and there's a sad picture of how warped they'd become and had to be discarded. There's some lovely pictures of ongoing finishing work and carving. No questions as such. Oh, there's a question about from a chap called Maxwell. There's a question about using a spalted timber, using beech, and it's interesting because, I mean, Stradivarius and I think Guarneri also made 1 or 2 violins with beech backs on them. So beech in itself is great. I mean, spalting is, of course, the beginnings of an attack by mould. So, you know, you'd have to make a piece by piece decision based on how much you've felt that the, you know, the structural integrity of the piece had been damaged. Because some spalted wood is tough as old boots, and others, you know, that you can get bits in there which are just like really soft pith, you know. What else we got? What else we got? Some pictures of someone's first violin being played. It's fantastic. Yeah, okay. I'll tell you what. Should we call it a day there? Thanks for your time. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, look after yourselves. See you again, folks. Cheers. Bye.